This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
This is a cold case murder out of Western Washington. Specifically, it's from 1995, and it's from Kitsap County. It's Patricia Lorraine Barnes. Her body was found in a ditch. One of the cold case initiatives has solved it. So Patricia lived in Seattle. She was last seen there on August 22nd, 1995. Her body was found 3 days later. She'd been fatally shot in the head and left naked, covered by a sleeping bag, in the 15,000 block of Peacock Hill Road Southeast. This was one where Robert Lee Yates was a person of interest in her death, but he ends up being excluded as a suspect. Now, the state attorney general's office, Spokane police, and the county sheriff's investigators there helped with that case. They figured out that Yates was at Fort Rucker, Alabama when Barnes was killed, and he was in the military, so there was a lot of information that the investigators could get. The particular base they were working with in Alabama kept really good records. So the man they believe killed Patricia Barnes is a man named Douglas Keith Croney, Krohne, and he's never been on my radar for anything. He would have been 33 years old in 1995. He died in 2016 in Arizona after he was electrocuted while installing a TV antenna that tilted and hit power lines.
Well, karma's a bitch.
Yeah, well, neither one of them have connections to Kitsap County where she was found. It's not clear how they met, but Mike Grant, who's a Kitsap County detective, said that he thinks that from what he reviewed, Barnes was an outgoing person who, got along with anybody. Croney used to live in Seattle and Tacoma. He had 5 felony convictions in Washington, including for first-degree robbery. At some point, there was a court order out of Pierce County, Washington, for his DNA to be collected for one of his crimes. Somehow, that never happened. So now his DNA is being put into CODIS. And they went into detail here. This is one of the reasons I was bringing this up. I wanted to run all this by you. So the department at Kitsap, they started focusing on cold cases in April 2018. I think that's because they got a grant, but I haven't confirmed that. They took another look at the physical evidence in Patricia's homicide, and they interviewed detectives who originally handled the case. They went over the photos of the scene, and they sent out evidence for DNA testing. The Washington State Patrol Crime Lab got a big chunk of the evidence, and then there were 2 private out-of-state labs that got it. One of those facilities is Othram Labs, which we've talked about, out of Texas. Use forensic genome sequencing and forensic genetic genealogy there. So just to summarize that in a sentence, that's where investigators try to identify a suspect by searching genealogical databases for relatives. So eventually, DNA from 3 places from the crime scene was identified as coming from the same suspect, the same unidentified man, but there was no matching CODIS. December 22nd, 2021, Othram Labs gave detectives a name, and investigators talked to police in Nogales, Arizona, and with a medical examiner in Tucson, Arizona, learning that Croney had died. They then sent his DNA to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab, and on February the 7th this year, that DNA was reported to be a match to the unknown DNA from the scene. So this is all kind of unfolding in March. Investigator Grant, he calls Barnes' family. His plan was to only contact them after it was solved. He wasn't going to say anything to them in the meantime. In a way, the case was actually solved in 1995. He says it's the work of those investigators and how they handled everything, which is something that you've brought about time and time again.
The only reason they were able to test is because they had the evidence there.
Yeah, the detectives had the sort of the foresight to collect as much as possible from the crime scene, which doesn't happen in every case. But he credited the original investigators and how they handled the investigation the first go round. Now, there was an artist rendering at the time of a person of interest that's last seen with Patricia. And in this press conference, which I think you can find coverage of this at Cairo7.com if you just look up Patricia Barnes. Cairo7 is one of the Washington news stations. They have some coverage of this, and they showed the photos during the press conference. And they are like almost identical. That's another like rare thing. This artist rendering from 95, it had a date on the bottom indicating it was from August of 1995 for Kitsap County. And then they have a mugshot of Douglas Keith Crone from, I think, the next year. And except for the mustache that the guy has in his mugshot, everything else looks remarkably similar.
Now, it does seem like he's got a criminal history, but I saw where there was a cigarette butt that had DNA evidence. I didn't see where the other samples came from. So the thought was that they had a consistent profile that was found at like 3 separate places at this crime scene, right?
Yeah.
And my concern, I'm not saying that it's not him. I'm sure the investigators have done their job properly. But my concern in those types of situations is I believe that the suspect composite,
yeah,
it came from like somebody who had run into them being the victim and whoever the composite is of, and that they were together, like hanging out, and that they had like, there was no distress or anything. She had told whoever this witness was that they were just going, downtown and they were going to get something to eat. So there's a substantial age difference. So I don't know that they were dating, but they were at least friends. Some of the information I saw indicated that Patricia Barnes was homeless.
I follow where you're going with that. I read some stuff that made me question what was going on there. But I also, while they made this announcement, I went through and I found where I couldn't tell when Croney was in and out of jail between 1992 and 1996. And I actually found where his lawyers in some of his criminal case, and then another, I guess it would be an appellate lawyer sort of piles on. In 1995 and 1996, he is in and out of court all the time over this old issue that he had. And the way that the issue went was it stems from something that happened in 1992. And they were basically saying that there was a rights violation in his case. And the way I read it was almost like he was in prison during the time they're saying Patricia was. I hope they would have caught that. But the time they're saying Patricia was murdered, it looks like Croney was still in prison being transferred around from 1992 almost into 1996. He had an escape charge out of Montana, and that is sort of what predates all of this. So,
well, he also had he was arrested on a suspicion of second-degree murder kidnapping in Pierce County in 1994.
I know. So I was not able to tell where he was in and out of jail yet because his criminal record is real murky. There's this whole thing that happened where he had an escape warrant in Montana, and then it had a governor's warrant on it. And one of the things that happens when you have like fugitive warrants like that is people can be held without a strong record of them being held. And then they use the court dates to like officially document it because you don't know, like they don't release the information of like inmate transfers and inmate movements in a way that makes it crystal clear like where he was. But The bottom line is, while they think they have a suspect, I had the same suspicions that you always sort of bring up, where it's like if they don't have his DNA on the body or in the body or whatever, like, does that mean?
Because we're talking about a cigarette butt at the crime scene.
Right.
I mean, to me, that does not a murderer make, depending on the situation. Now, especially since I don't know what the motivation was behind him killing her. Not that that would have to become a thing, but my point is, he died. This man is dead, and his DNA has been matched. This is, the case is going to be closed on this, and he will forever be her killer because that's what has lined up here. It may absolutely be right. It's just, I feel like there's some steps that might have been skipped. And for me, because he's not going to go on trial for it or plead guilty to it, I don't know with 100% certainty that justice is being served. Now, hopefully the investigators based on their experience, they made a presumption, an accurate presumption, that the consistency of the DNA and where it was found would be that of the killers. But the only thing that's mentioned is a cigarette butt. So it's a cigarette butt found near where the body was dumped. And I feel like in a lot of situations that could be a stretch. But, what do you do? Like,
I don't know. This is one of my concerns with DNA and genetic genealogy. Will it be used to cut corners or be a little lazy? And when I pulled this up, I also pulled up. I pulled. By the way, they have him listed as natural causes.
Well,
I mean, he was in a trailer park setting up a TV antenna, and
are you sure it wasn't accidental?
No, it says natural. The death certificate says natural. It doesn't say accidental.
Pima County.
It doesn't. Yeah, but it doesn't say accidental. It says natural causes. So the linchpin for this case is that cigarette butt, and the crime took place in August of 1995. And I'm telling you, there's court records that. So Washington. I've always had some issues with how Washington keeps records as far as the court, even missing persons cases. The way that they keep their court records is if they're dismissed, you have to go get like the archival microfiche or the physical documents. So I can't just go online and get his court records from 1995. All I can do is tell you he had multiple motions that, to me, looked like a lawyer was trying to get him out of jail. And they go all the way through 1995 and they end in 1996. What I had read about her that I think you might have read the same thing was she was known as the towel lady, and she would frequently have a towel or a bandana around her head, and that she would frequent Pioneer Square, which had a couple of homeless shelters. Her pink curlers were listed in the evidence, by the way, like her.
Right. Well, she was, according to what I read, she didn't have a residence. She was homeless, and she went like to the different shelters, and so she was known in that community, like you said, as the towel lady.
Yeah.
And so, the indication is that the last time she was seen with a man that they, the witness provided information to make this composite drawing. And it does look very similar to Douglas Keith Crone, whatever. It does look very similar to Douglas Keith Crone, but it doesn't. Now, I would say that, if that was the person she was with and his DNA is left at the scene of the crime, the probability becomes more likely that he killed her, right?
Yeah.
But I just can't imagine what his motivation was to kill this woman. And she indicates to the witness they're going out to go eat. And so it sounds like, she's being friendly with him. They they straight up say that they can't really put him there.
I understand what they're saying, because when I go looking for him, And this happens occasionally. It's not usually more modern cases, and this is sort of a modern case. I mean, it's the last 30 years, but the cases that I've run into where I can't place someone who's incarcerated are pretty rare. But usually what happens is it's because they're in a place on another place's charge. So if he was picked up in, I don't know, Arizona, it might look like he was in jail in Washington because it's a Washington charge. But he's really in Arizona holding, going through a lot of things that don't make the final paperwork. Like they'll be in there. There's a record of them, but you're not looking for court records or incarceration records. You're simply looking for like housekeeping and administrative records, which is like there was an extradition hearing, but he was held at this jail for that.
Well, getting out of that, I would say, there's going to be a footprint of him having been in the area, regardless. And I'm not talking about like court records. Like he had to have stayed somewhere. He has to have a connection to somebody somewhere, because it doesn't seem like he's even like close to this area, like in the natural course of his life, right?
No, I mean, he's in Washington, but that's as close as it really gets. He's not close to the area of the body dump.
Right. And so, in some ways, it makes it more likely he was there just for the murder, right?
Yeah. This has been one of my concerns, though. Are we going to be closing impossible cold cases because we simply don't want like the cases to loom open?
I don't think that that's what they're doing. I feel like that the intentions here would be like, well, this makes the most sense of anything.
Yeah.
It's exciting to get DNA matches. This just concerned me because, when you have a victim and they collected the fingernail scrapings,
right?
That is something that a victim of a murder or a homicide, if they have a person's DNA under their fingernails and it's not somebody that it can be otherwise explained, right?
Yeah.
Which it takes a lot to get somebody's DNA under your fingernails. You've got to literally scratch them. I could imagine a few cases where it may not be sinister, but for the most part, if that's where the DNA is, you've probably got your perpetrator. Like, that's not what I'm hearing is happening here. And so, the latest thing is touch DNA, that like you can get this huge amount of information from very little residue.
Material.
Yeah. And so under those circumstances, while it is enlightening and it is great that all of a sudden, if you touch something, your touch DNA is going to show up. But
right.
Also, if you touch something, your touch DNA is going to show up. So, it could be a very innocent interaction.
Yeah, I agree.
But I'd like to know more information, like how many profiles did they find, right? Maybe, I don't know. It seems like this is a shot in the dark. He may very well be the perpetrator, but see, I just don't know. I don't know. I was going to say, I think that maybe it should just go unsolved, but that's not really true because I do feel like they deserve closure. But also, I feel like it's almost worse if somebody is convicted in the court of public opinion of killing someone when they are dead and they never got to go on trial for it.
Yeah, I mean, I see it from that perspective too. From a different perspective, though, what if we miss a Robert Lee Yates because of that? Like, what if we miss a Ted Bundy because of that? What if other crimes keep happening because we closed a cold case instead of digging one step further? And like all those what ifs are a little obnoxious. And I think that I probably wouldn't be super appreciated for saying most of them. But the idea is like, we could miss things. There could definitely, like in this case, they had already chalked this up to being Robert Lee Yates. And they had not had any proof that it was him. I
think that was just their like logical conclusion after however many years they had investigated it.
Right. Well, when you've got a guy that's alleged to have killed, I think Yates has like 12 presumed victims.
Yeah, I'm at some point in my career as a whatever this is, I'm going to go back through all the people who have all these multiple killings.
Yeah, no, we've started doing that like
Because,
one at a time because it's sort of ridiculous.
Some of them are legitimate. Most of them are not legitimate.
Right.
And so where does that leave you? Well, it leaves you with people who may not be killers at all being touted as serial killers.
Yep.
And a lot of victims not ever getting justice, and therefore a lot of murderers out on the streets. Now, granted, typically like these types of murders where somebody's copped to multiple killings, most of the time, the person who actually killed the victims is going to be somebody close to the victim, and it's going to be a different person for each victim, right?
Right.
It's never going to be like this one random person again. But at the same time, they got away with murder.
There's so many one-offs out there anyways. It would be really hard to track every single one of them down. And, we get into the situation where there's victims that aren't even found for some of these crazy multiple murders. And that leaves these big question marks on things. But I just wanted to point this one out. I thought it was an interesting case. And, they did officially declare it solved in March of 2022. I don't know what the future of that will look like. Is sort of where I go.
I think it's just closed.
Yeah, I'm talking about the future of the use of technology, I guess, for the purpose of closing these cold cases. Because I don't want to disparage the technology. I think it's a good thing. I just think it's going to end up having to have careful legal machinations, so it were.
And without question, finding a DNA profile in 3 places close to, now this wasn't on the body, this was close to where the body was found. Okay. Yeah. Having a profile in 3 different places consistently, I mean, it's something. It is not, however, evidence of murder.
Yeah. So in these cases, what makes me wonder is what would that be like if that played out in court? Now he's dead, so that's not going to happen. But if
he would certainly, when the state carries the burden, right? The burden of proof. So they say, okay, we've got these 3 areas where your DNA was found, and this is where the body was found. I'm sure they'd draw a picture and show everybody or show it to the jury.
Right.
And so they have now presented the fact that for whatever reason, there's his DNA, this close to the body, where the body was found. And they would give information about who found it and when they found it and all that stuff. And so they've presented enough evidence that I feel like the defense would have to defend that, right?
Right.
Because otherwise, that's enough evidence possibly to make a jury think that he did it, unless there's an explanation for it. Okay. And
but we don't get that because he's dead.
Exactly. And that's where my problem with it comes in. Now, if you present the same thing to a jury, but you're like, instead of it being at 3 consistent places where the body was found, it's on 3 places on her body. Now that, to me, is way more likely to convince a jury, right? Because, it'd be hard to get somebody's DNA on you unless you had now, what if he said, well, we had been on a date and we were making out or whatever, right? That's an innocent way his DNA could be on her.
Or even we were both homeless and we were just doing some drugs together.
Well, right. Any sort of innocent explanation, which
I'm not accusing her of being a drug user or even him of being a drug user.
Well,
I'm just saying
that's been cold and huddling together. I mean, the point is without, so to me, putting up the evidence that this is scientific physical evidence, you were there, and then having either, an explanation that is bought or not, that's how you rebut that, right? And none of that's happening here. It's just like this far after his death, they're saying, oh, well, that guy was at least at the scene. But now they've said they think that he killed her. I didn't see any murder charges. He does have the attempted kidnapping,
it doesn't look like he got any time for that. He got time for other things. He got time for first-degree robbery, but it looks like a previous incident.
And so because of that, unless somebody was like, yeah, she had $20,000 cash on her or something, like, why would he have killed this old woman? His rap sheet is about robbery.
Yeah, I don't have anything. I mean, I'm hoping that the police have more about arrests and maybe things that didn't result in convictions, so they're working with a little more behavioral information than I am.
Right, or he could have just been on drugs and thought she had. I mean, I'm not trying to be mean, but like he could have thought she had money and that's why he killed her. And because
money or things or
if
whatever.
you have like this, if drugs come into play, then it alters people's perception, like money wise. He might not have thought the whole thing through. Like, this is a homeless woman, she has nothing.
And that gives a great segue back into this case we've been talking about, because like you and I keep running into this wall of, why are these people doing these things for money and not getting the money?
Well, right. And the most recent case, I just wanted to point out we've called her Monica Patterson, and her name is Monica Melissa Patterson.
Yeah.
And everybody that I've seen anywhere talking about her calls her Melissa. And I don't feel like we were doing that. I feel like we were calling her Monica because that's what was on like the court paperwork.
Yeah, I was using, that's strictly been a storytelling device for me to use the word Monica there, because they oscillate between Monica, Melissa, and Patterson. So if I just use the court documents and I read Patterson or Melissa or whatever, I've stuck to just trying to say Monica because it makes it simpler. But I do agree that should be.
I just wanted to clarify that because I realized that happened. But, if Monica is used or Melissa or Patterson is used, like, it's all the same person. It's Monica Melissa Patterson. And we can just continue calling her Monica because that's what we've called her the whole time. And It is her name. So
yeah. So I've stuck with Monica for her. And then we've got Penny. And that's not the wife's name at all. I'm just using Penny because it's simpler to call her.
That's what they
Penny.
call her, yeah.
Right. And then there's Martin. Martin is Penny's husband. Mark, who is also Martin Jr., it's just easier to call him Mark than Martin. In the court papers, they call him both Martin Jr. and Mark.
And I feel like I need to clarify something else about that. And I don't know if it'll make it into an earlier episode or not, but I can't remember because I was kind of bolstering his credibility as not being responsible for anything bad happening to his parents. And I just want to say, I realized that he was adopted. And so if I made the statement that like, this is his like flesh and blood, why would he do anything to them? That's not entirely accurate. He still was a very loving son, and his parents adopted him, and he had a great childhood and everything, but he was an adopted child.
Well, okay, that's good to point that out. But also, like, this is an adult.
Oh, yeah. By the time, when this is happening, like, he's got his, like, own grandchildren practically. I mean, he's, like probably 50-ish.
He's in his 40s or 50s as in the story parts that we're telling. So he's older. He's not, like, these are people, if anything, I would think that would be a reason. He's sort of removed and created his own family, which you point out a couple of times in other episodes. But like, that's important to remember here, that this guy really doesn't have anything to do with the money part of the situation.
He doesn't. And the reason I brought it up was because a big part of Monica's sort of defense and what she was sort of using in her reality, like right before Martin died, was that Mark was this terrible person who was trying to take advantage of his father, and he was greedy, and he wanted him declared incompetent and to take everything. And so it is relevant to the story. I just didn't want, because sometimes I know I pick things apart And so, I was like, it's his flesh and blood. And then you realize, oh, he's adopted. Then you're like, well, she doesn't even know what she's talking about. Right. And
I don't think you have to defend yourself there, but I will make sure that's
to
fixed.
clarify is all.
Well, so where we left off was Martin in January of 2015. Martin suddenly dies. Now, it's ruled by the medical examiner to be a heart attack. Essentially, he has had a cardiac event and died. But afterwards, his housekeeper, Celestina, she comes forward in the midst of an Adult Protective Services investigation that really has nothing to do with Martin's death. It has more to do with what was happening before Martin passed away, but after his wife died. There's about a 3-month lag time there. She dies in September. He dies in January. These people that you could hear in the other 2 episodes have glommed onto them and are exploiting Martin for money. And that has made its way to Adult Protective Services and to the local sheriff's departments. Although it's a case of like too little too late, because by the time the investigation really ramps up and gets going, Martin is dead. And it's presumed to be by a heart attack. But Celestina, the housekeeper, comes forward to state that she saw Monica and Mario, her handyman from her business, the Comfort Houses, which is that one of the hospice care facilities that were involved. They are underneath a facility called GVH. They basically this woman and this handyman independently have sort of taken over Martin's life, and Celestina basically witnessed evidence of the homicide.
Right, and she goes to the Texas Rangers with this information a month after.
Yeah, so where we picked up was we have a Texas Ranger. His name is Robert Calloway, and he is going through the phone records, the money. In January and February of 2015, some of the investigation just starts because Robert Calloway gets involved. And what he's done here is he's had a couple of phone calls take place between Celestina and Monica. And they've sort of documented that Monica gave Mario a heads up to get the heck out of town. And that takes us into the summer months in 2015. But there was an important thing that happened in August of 2015. And that is, based on what the Ranger has run down and some of the other investigators in the months between January and August, Martin's body gets exhumed, which is a pretty rare thing for a body to be exhumed 6 months after it's been put in the ground. An autopsy is performed by a Hidalgo County forensic pathologist named Norma Jean Farley. Farley's an expert. When she gets into this, she says that she didn't detect petechia, that's a medical condition that a lot of true crime people will know. It happens in the eyes and around the eyes as evidence that a person has been strangled or asphyxiated.
Right. It can happen really anywhere there's blood vessels, because it's the blood vessels expanding. But it's most commonly seen in the eyes because of the substantial difference it makes.
Right. And according to her report, it doesn't skew things because, in her own words, she says we may not get these little hemorrhages in the eyes, and there may not be any hemorrhage in neck muscles either in a manual type of strangulation. And if the person is intoxicated or otherwise indisposed, so they're not struggling as much, or, and this was the key words, if they're frail, if they're older. And let's keep in mind, Martin is 96 years old when this is happening to him. If you're able to get someone who is intoxicated or otherwise indisposed or frail, and you use pillows, towels, or curtains or anything that's soft, they don't leave trauma. They don't necessarily leave petechia. They don't leave bruises elsewhere on the body. You can very easily have someone die and it looked very natural, which is what sparked this whole conversation.
Right. So petechia, like if it is present, then the person was most likely strangled. But just because it's not present doesn't mean they weren't.
Correct. And the medical examiner is able to go through and do a really thorough examination of Martin. And she does point out that he did have a mild case of coronary artery disease, and he had mild heart disease. He had a degenerative joint disease. And from her perspective, writing up in this report, she doesn't believe that this had anything to do with the cause of death, even though Monica mentions them as being debilitating in Martin in the month before his death. As she ruled out multiple myeloma, which was the cancer diagnosis that Martin had from 2012. She agrees with all sides of this, the investigators and later defense investigators and defense attorneys, that nothing at this autopsy seems like a suffocation case on the surface, but she concludes that Martin's death is probably asphyxia by suffocation. And she bases this information she bases this medical opinion on information received from Martin's medical records and from several investigative agencies. That was all Ranger Calloway needed to do a little more work on this case. So what he starts to do is he picks apart Martin's bank accounts, and he tries to figure out a way that they could track them. And according to Ranger Calloway, tracking an amount of money in excess of $600,000 is the biggest hurdle that the investigators ran into. There was an investigator with the Hidalgo County Sheriff's Office named Adam Palmer. Now, he went through and reviewed both Martin and Monica's Chase Bank records. Monica transferred $222,283 from Martin's bank account into her own bank account shortly after Martin was dead. Now, she's allowed to do this because she had gone through the trouble of basically securing every instrument she could to take over Martin's finances. She could have done it whether he was alive or not, with all the documentation she had racked up legally. But realistically, it would be much easier if Martin was out of the picture for her to be able to tinker with his finances. So there were stacks of cash in Martin's safety deposit box, and those monies were divided out to leave to certain individuals. When Adam Palmer went in to examine what was in the safety deposit box, the reported values didn't match what was left in the deposit box. For example, one stack had been left to Pastor Grubb, and it had $100,000 written on it. But when Palmer put it through the money counter, it only had $73,528. So it was almost $37,000 short. It was 36 and change short. There was another stack indicating it was to go to Comfort House, and that it was sort of a gift for having taken care of Penny. It was supposed to contain $100,000, but it only had $81,887 in it. So it's, close to $20,000 short. The safety deposit box log revealed there were 3 recent access dates. One was September 11th, 2014, October 21st of 2014, and then, suspiciously enough, January 13th, 2015. So in the bank surveillance footage for the later dates, Monica was with Martin when he accessed the safe deposit box. Ranger Calloway went on to state that there were several search warrants executed to determine what happened to the cash, but they didn't provide real answers. And in the course of the investigation, Calloway found that Monica had unpaid federal tax liens in the amount of $205,183.21 for a former failed business venture. Calloway was asked, what do the taxes have to do with Martin's murder? And he responded that it showed that Monica needed a large amount of money to pay off those tax liens. This is Calloway, in his mind, this is Monica's motive to murder Martin. And I think I agree with him. How do you feel about the tax lien being behind it all?
What does it take to have a tax lien of $205,000?
So that's like an accounting question. Here's how I can answer it very generally. It means that you were purported to have enough income that you did not pay taxes on to, after interest, penalties, and administrative fees, owe $250,000 to the government. And that's
a former failed business venture. It's which she must have been operating.
She could have say there was a Comfort 1.0 and now she's operating Comfort House 2.0. Comfort 1.0 could have made $1 million, and maybe she only paid taxes on $600,000. But for some reason, they were subject to an audit.
She didn't have her paperwork,
right? It doesn't
to where it protected her personally.
Right.
Okay. Well, so I do think that I don't know that it matters about the tax lien. I think that she heard nothing but ka-ching from the moment she met this old man who talked about how much money he had, who, she was advised the son of this couple was trying to get their money. It was erroneous, but, I think that she was just after the money. But yeah, I think that this could be, because when the federal government puts a tax lien, they can take everything from you. They can seize your bank accounts. They can do all kinds of stuff that normal creditors and people you owe money to can't do, right?
Yeah, there could be some kind of arrangement here, particularly if there was an audit. There could be an arrangement where she's due to pay this. This could be what's left on the tax lien. She could have been paying on it. There's lots of different ways that this could work.
I find it really hard to sort of fathom, which I guess I don't know why I keep being disappointed, but to me it seems like somebody that's directing this care facility would have been smart enough to protect her personal, her personally from being held responsible for a failed business venture. But so it didn't make sense at first, but now I realize I should stop expecting so much from her.
Well, so with this information in hand, meaning with the information about the safe deposit boxes, stacks of cash not lining up, and Monica and Martin accessing this with the understanding that Monica owes this tax lien, and with all the money she moved around in the days after Martin's death, which is $250,000. That's a lot of money. In late August, Ranger Calloway finally draws up and executes an arrest warrant for Monica. And that's based on all the information that he has put together related to the money moving and what Adam Palmer came up with. Calloway reaches out to try and talk to Monica's mom. But it turns out that 2 weeks after Monica gets arrested, her mother took a one-way flight to Cuba. How weird is that? They throw that out there, but they never really wrap up what was going on there.
Actually, this case is one of the first cases that I've seen where these circumstantial things that, for example, it looks guilty for her mother to go to Cuba one way, right? That looks weird.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the other stuff that we'll get to, it's one of the first cases I've ever seen investigators put a substantial amount of weight on those types of things.
Well, they add up. And if what we just said wasn't enough, there was more to this investigation into the financial crimes. So Monica was alleged to have improperly spent Comfort House's funds between 2014 and 2015. So that is on top of stealing Martin's money. She's also been tinkering with the money for her business, essentially.
She doesn't own that business. She just directs it.
Her job, I don't know what the right word would be. Her place of employment.
Sure.
And you're right. I may have referred to her owning Comfort, so I should correct that. She's an employee.
Right.
She manages their finances.
Right. She's been appointed by the board to be the director of the place.
Yeah. So one of the first things they found was that Monica had created under the radar, unauthorized use. She was responsible for the unauthorized creation of a Comfort checking account at Falcon Bank in April of 2014. In January of 2014, Monica was hired as the lead administrator for Comfort, which is a 10-bed licensed not-for-profit facility for terminally ill residents. It's hospice care. Monica was responsible for managing the finances and raising the visibility within the community for the not-for-profit. This is according to Carol Hansen, who was also an employee for Comfort. She had worked in the financial department for 7 years there, and she resigned 6 weeks after Monica was hired. According to Carol, Comfort only operated out of 2 bank accounts, and neither which one of those was out of Falcon Bank, where this new account had come from. Just, for the record, and just like for people to have like that skepticism if they won't, Carol did cite her tumultuous relationship with Monica as her reason for leaving the facility. And she claimed that Monica had touted her connections to local law enforcement as a reason that she would have to go through the office as with a fine-tooth comb to find something to terminate Carol. So Monica was basically bullying Carol out. Shortly after Carol resigned, Monica promoted Melissa Chavez, who was a certified nursing assistant, from caregiver to administrative liaison. Chavez stated that she had become tasked with reviewing the bank statements to track expenditures and to ensure that Comfort Records and QuickBooks, the facilities using a QuickBooks accounting software at the time as a desktop terminal, that she's assigned to make sure they are accurate. But Chavez did not know anything about the Falcon Bank account. She came across some unusual expenses, and one of those was a gym membership. Chavez found a gym membership that Monica basically said to her she had inadvertently used her Comfort debit card, and it wasn't supposed to be that card, and she would take care of it. But the gym membership expense was a recurring charge on the Comfort account, and Monica never took care of it the way that she had promised Chavez she would. In less than 6 months, Chavez finally requested that she be allowed to return to her position as caregiver, including a reduction in salary. She said she had a particular discomfort in any role involving responsibility for the organization's finances, and she did not feel that she was suitable for those roles. So she was demoted, but she retained the title of finance director. And what Chavez told Monica she didn't want the title, Monica asked Chavez why she could not just be happy playing the part. And in July of 2014, Chavez said sayonara to Comfort, and she quit.
Right. And a lot of people, I don't know if people know or not, but, when you're working at a 501c3, she was, you can get in a lot of trouble for...
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to get audited and a lot of ways to get in trouble related to the finances.
Right. And if she had maintained that position and that title, she would have been facing consequences that she was not responsible for, it doesn't seem like.
Yes. When the financing staff changes were going on, basically she made someone who's not capable in their own statement and their own opinion of managing the finances. She's basically put a puppet in place, and she wants to play puppet master.
She wasn't capable of telling her to stop spending the company's money.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
And she didn't have it in her to figure out how to set things right, but she could tell something was wrong, and she wanted no part of it.
Right.
So when this happens, Monica decides to hire a CPA firm to conduct an internal audit. She's referred to this audit by Lord Suarez, who is a staff member at the Comfort House and the wife of Heriberto Suarez. So Lords works at the CPA firm. Melissa Gonzalez is a public accountant with Gonzalez CPA. And she said they were contracted to conduct 2 audits. The first audit that they do is financial records between July 1st, 2013 and June 30th of 2014. Gonzalez noted a drastic change in the investment account compared to the prior year. She said that the auditing also revealed questionable small purchases that were cleared when Monica claimed the purchases were for fundraising purposes. And for Melissa's part, she says afterwards she realized there was a conflict of interest, but she did not understand there was a conflict of interest, and there was not one disclosed to her when she starts the first audit. Melissa ends up getting asked why she did not include any mention of the Falcon bank account. She ends up being confronted with a copy of the Comfort House board minutes. When the board here is, as you previously mentioned, sort of in charge of this, and they're the ones who put Monica in place to do what she's doing. The board minutes appear to reflect that they approved the opening of a new checking account for daily operating expenses, and that the account was opened by Monica at Falcon Bank on April 9th of 2014. Gonzalez did not know that it existed. She explained that reviewing this, she did find these original minutes later on, but the minutes that they end up presenting in court versus what Gonzalez is asked about, they're not the same thing. So the language that's in one of them says something completely different, and this is, I guess, where you are getting at the name thing, because in the minutes they reference Monica as Melissa Patterson, which, as you said, they call her Melissa sort of throughout these documents. The documents that end up getting admitted at trial by the defense, meaning Monica's attorneys, they contained language which did not exist in Melissa Gonzalez's firm copy of Comfort's minutes from that board meeting where the Falcon Bank is discussed. And here's what it says. Open new business checking. Melissa Patterson was instructed by the board to open a new business account listing her as a primary signer. This account will be utilized for daily operating expenses, and therefore bank of choice should be within close proximity to the Comfort House. But the official copy that the firm retained of Comfort's minutes included no provision regarding the board's approval or acknowledgement of a new checking account. The language that's presented there and ends up in a court copy turns out to be complete bullshit.
Right. So she's cooking the books. I mean, in a way, because while that's not a financial statement directly, when you are running a not-for-profit, the auditors, which the CPA firm would be, the IRS requires the audits. They make up a statement indicating that, they've reviewed and everything's on the up and up. Well, they have to have all the board meeting minutes to compare and contrast what's happened in the finances. Because in a not-for-profit, for one thing, you always have to have two signatures on everything. I couldn't just write you a check and sign my name to it. I would have to have another signatory, somebody that's allowed to sign the checks, sign as well, right?
Yeah.
And right here where she has put this, obviously if they had reviewed those minutes and they had actually said that would have presented a problem, right? Because it's basically giving her the authority to spend money without getting anybody's approval.
Yeah, and the way they end up trying to use this is to basically say that Monica was going out of her way to audit the finances and be on the up and up. And it gets even stickier because Monica ends up accusing Melissa Gonzalez of conspiring against her. So it does end up coming into court that Melissa Gonzalez's cousin, Lord's husband, did you catch all that?
Yes.
Okay. Who is also a person who shows up at Comfort House, he's having an affair with Monica. So they try and use that later to be a reason to basically say that Melissa Gonzalez is lying.
To impeach her testimony, right?
Later they use that as an attempt to, like you said, impeach her testimony or alter her testimony, because they have clearly stuck this, for some reason, this phrasing in the minutes after the fact, which I'm pretty sure should be considered perjury depending on how they did it. But I don't know that it would be an official document. Does that make sense?
Right. Well, see that I don't know that they could say it was perjury because
They brought it in under her.
Well, what happens is at a not for like during board meetings for not for profits, the previous meetings minutes are presented to everyone present and they're voted on and they're accepted as the record.
Right.
And so there can be a lot of ambiguity, like in this type of thing, where she's presented board meeting minutes that aren't accurate.
Yeah.
So I don't know, like to the extent that, it would be that they could prove it, and it's probably not even worth it in this situation because of the other stuff that's happening. But the fact that a professional, accounting firm said, well, we've got all these other minutes that are right, but this one doesn't say that. They don't have any, the motivation to have that statement in there is to clear Monica. Like the accounting firm has absolutely no reason to, they don't care what they do. They just need to make sure they're doing whatever they've said they're going to do.
Right. So over at the Texas Department of Public Safety, on the behest of the Rangers, the Intelligence and Counterterrorism section gets involved. And what these guys do is, particularly in this case, they do a lot of forensic accounting. They're very skilled at finding where people have hidden money, where people have used unauthorized accounts. And they get a woman named Carolyn DeWitt involved. And Carolyn DeWitt, she reviews Comfort House's Falcon bank records. This is that I don't know what you want to call it, the undercover account here that Monica opened in April 2014 using the Comfort House IRS tax exemption identification number. And according to DeWitt, the unauthorized expenditures from this Falcon bank account are in excess of $30,000. To be exact, $36,464.76. Board members during Monica's tenure, they make statements regarding the authorization of the Falcon account and basically say that Monica has a history of not being upfront with the board. There was Margarito Trujillo and Timothy Brown. They were on the board when Monica got hired. Now, under Carol Hanson's tenure, every penny was accounted for, and each board member would receive like an expenditure spreadsheet printout at monthly meetings. So they knew all of the financial records. It was provided to them. Whether they chose to review it or not was up to them. Monica never provided the board with any of Comfort House's financial records. So these board members, they don't back her up at all, and they sort of leave her high and dry. Now, the way that they present their relationship with Monica is that she was sort of a wild card in the mix. Timothy Brown, he states that Monica was well aware of what she was allowed and not allowed to spend money on behalf of Comfort. And he flat out denied approving any Comfort monies for Monica's personal use. Any checks over $1,000, according to Brown, they had to be signed by one of the board members. However, they run into a problem here. And that problem is that there are no official policies and procedures in place for the Comfort board related to the financial transactions.
The bank should know whether they have to have dual signatures or not. So that would be like sort of an indirect policy and procedure, because now if she's forging people's names, I mean,
we move into a different type of crime.
It's kind of hard, the bank is, I guess they are supposed to compare that kind of thing, but it's a completely different world now as far as banking goes. And so when you get out like the actual huge like binder checks,
yeah,
it's weird, right?
Yeah, it's really weird. It doesn't. It's not the same anymore. Margarito, he specifically, in his statement and in one of his interviews, he references an incident where he had gone by Comfort House around noon and there was no one around. So he got a phone call later from Monica, who demanded to know why would he question her employees, or her operation. And then Monica threatened to get Trujillo thrown off the board. After that, Trujillo stopped coming by the Comfort House office. Timothy Brown, in his statement, he said he felt unwelcome after he reported Monica to APS, which is Adult Protective Services. He got an anonymous complaint regarding Monica and her relationship with a patient. And Monica asked Brown to quit the board, and Brown did resign in early 2015. He had been there for the longest time and had the most history with Comfort House, more history with Comfort House than anyone else when he resigned.
Right, and the reason that he had he reported what he had received. I don't know who sent the anonymous letter. I think it was possibly somebody in the office that wasn't working there any longer. But he told Monica was irate at him for it. But he said, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, this isn't going to be a problem, which kind of goes back to what you were saying about speaking up about stuff. But yeah, she, anytime that you're sitting at this type of situation, at the drop of a hat, they should be able to print you off a financial statement indicating where all the money has gone. And I mean, it should be up to date all the time. And the fact that, this would just raise a lot of red flags, her behavior, acting the way she did, because in her official fiduciary capacity as the director, she should have been more than happy to provide the board members with anything they wanted.
In 2015, she starts tinkering with the board because people are resigning. She brings on Paul Garcia and Omar Guevara. They join the board. Garcia joins as board treasurer, and he inquires several times about the bank statements. Monica always has an excuse as to why she could not provide any detailed reports. Basically, she wasn't doing them. She just considered it all to be her money and tried to not overspend it. According to Paul Garcia, Monica said that the issue was with the bank. Omar Guevara, he was responsible in part for overseeing the operations in conjunction with Monica. He repeatedly requested to see the QuickBooks printouts and final statements. And at the board's monthly meetings, he was always told by Monica that QuickBooks was down. So neither Paul nor Omar had ever seen any financial documentation related to Comfort House from Monica. Then we start getting into what did Monica use money from Comfort House for? So there were multiple trips that she took in fall of 2014 and spring of 2015, including a trip to Las Vegas and multiple hotel stays in state. There were flight tickets purchased in the amount of $2,984 for Monica, Monica's mom, and for Martin, for some reason, who was unable to attend. There were I guess he wanted to make sure he could go if he wanted. Refund that, you get the same cash. Hotel stays were also charged to the Comfort account. And then Suarez said that he got his truck fixed up, and Monica was responsible for helping him with that. And she brought him current on his property taxes, which is all sorts of ironic. And he testified that Monica provided him with $1,000 by direct deposit for the truck and $10,000 in cash for his taxes. But in his statement, he says he has no idea how Monica got this money. Monica also arranged an elaborate graduation party for her 21-year-old son. There were 300 people in attendance, and several of those people were from the Comfort House board. There were multiple individuals that Monica had hired for this party that ended up coming into this criminal investigation later. For the party, remember, we're still talking about Comfort House money here, even though I'm talking about a graduation party. She spent $2,000 for a lighted dance floor, $4,680 for a location, tables and chairs, $6,900 for catering, $3,495 for lounge sets and linens, $1,623 for audio and lights, $1,646 for valet parking for the guests, $650 for photography. Total expenses charged to the Comfort House for this event exceeded $20,000. She had a nicer graduation party for her son than they cost more than my wedding.
Yeah, she really cheaped out on the photography, though.
are,
I mean, I'm
are
just
you offended?
saying,
She only paid $650.
$650. Like, would she have somebody with their cell phone camera?
That sounds like one of those photo booth things.
This is very interesting to me. So her son was 21, and that leads me to believe he was probably graduating from a four-year a
University.
4-year university. That seemed, I don't have any confirmation of that. However, he's graduated college. She throws him this party, and she throws it on Comfort House's dime. She is not authorized to do this by any, she would never be allowed to do this. Even if she put it before the board, they'd all say, no, this isn't what that money's for. And so she does that. And, her son was probably really happy about this party. And she did it to sort of impress him and his friends and everybody she knows. Having not done all that, he wouldn't have had the party, but he wouldn't face the fact that party was the result of this, right? Like, she's stealing money. What do you think is worse?
I think he would have liked the smaller party and the lack of arrest.
Right? I mean, because I can't imagine. It's almost like, being given everything and then finding that, your mom basically stole it from the older people in her care at this facility.
Yeah.
Like, that makes it just really traumatic, I think, because, he's never going to live that down. Obviously, I don't think the child would know, right?
No,
and it seems like nobody. Part of the reason that it wasn't readily apparent was that she was probably living beyond her means to begin with,
right?
And she had an affluent family, and she hadn't been successful. Clearly, now it could be that she was successful and she just didn't pay her taxes, right? But it just seems like maybe she was able to just sort of combine everything together. And so it wasn't like she suddenly had all this money. She was just maintaining this lifestyle, right?
Right.
And so the expectation was that he would have an awesome graduation party. This graduation party is insane.
Well, yeah, this is a $20,000 plus graduation party. I mean, just from what I could see in this list, I really quickly I almost get to 30,000. So this is basically a wedding that's being thrown in the form of a graduation party for this kid.
So that's extravagant to begin with, even if it's your own money that you've worked for.
Yeah,
and it's just beyond comprehension that you would steal that money.
Yeah. So after Monica's arrested, Guevara, who she brought onto the board, tasked himself with conducting sort of an internal informal audit. He's the one who found all of this. He testified that scouring through Patterson's old office, he would find Ziploc bags full of receipts. And he found documents reflecting expenses that he was pretty sure the board members were not aware of. So he basically lists off later that among the money that they did not approve, it starts with the graduation party. So that's a $30,000 chunk of money that the board was completely unaware of, which I can't imagine in any shape or form that that's one of the job perks, is throwing one of your administrator's sons a graduation party. But there were also flights to Las Vegas for 4 persons. There was a hotel room in Las Vegas, this ongoing gym membership that she never took care of. There were multiple car rentals, and there were miscellaneous restaurant expenses. Now, Monica was given a car allowance, but she was not given a dinner allowance, and she did not have the authority to travel outside of the Valley on anything related to comfort accounts without approval. So he estimated in this sort of informal board presentation and later in court that unauthorized expenditures for 2014 were $21,056.67. And then for 2015, they were $36,188.65. And he reported his collective findings during a board meeting. And in November of 2015, Patterson and Comfort House reached a settlement agreement which contained a no admission of liability provision. It required Patterson to repay $70,000 to Comfort House. And after this agreement was entered into, Guevara reported Monica to the local law enforcement. She had already been arrested related to Martin's case, but they piled this on top of her at this time. And now Calloway comes back into the picture, and DeWitt is the one who calculates all these expenses. There were typos that get brought up at appeal. I'm going to mention this one because I thought it was hilarious. There was a July 9th, 2015 typo. Or I hope it's a typo, but it said that they spent $19,385 at Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, I guess it would be like $19.38 in the
No, I think it's $193.85. I think she bought like lunch for everybody. $19 at Chick-fil-A is like one meal and maybe an extra drink.
If that much. If you get it delivered, it's less than that. Anyway.
Yeah, so now on this one, I just want to point out this theft stuff, it results in 4 counts of theft from the Comfort House. Essentially, what those 4 counts are is they are felony misappropriation of funds and fraud. And she is found guilty on all 4 of those accounts. And she does later on attempt to appeal it. Okay. At the end of all of this, for the longest time, Monica maintains her innocence. In fact, I think to this day, she says she's innocent. And I think there's a website currently that I found that's proclaiming her innocence. But she is, she's convicted of everything that we just mentioned to you. And I did not lay this out from my perspective for storytelling purposes. And I know that's a little different than how I normally do things. I told you what all of these investigators and the courts found happened. Wouldn't you agree?
I think so. It was so much that it became a little bit muddled, in my opinion, because it's hard to distinguish when she's stealing money or using money inappropriately. At first, it's hard to distinguish who she's doing it to. Now, so basically it boils down to the most important crime that she's convicted for is capital murder. And to me, putting everything else aside, this was the most important aspect of this case to me. Now, her motivations behind stealing the money make the financial crimes worth pursuing, especially since they're already going to have her on trial for capital murder.
Right.
It has been posited by many of the investigators, many different sort of side parties involved in this case, that Monica may have played a part in hastening Penny's death.
Yes.
However, Mark sort of made the decision that this, while not officially, was on behalf of Penny as well, because he didn't want her exhumed. He didn't want to exhume both of his parents. And there's so much evidence here in Martin's death that it was a better case, basically.
Yeah.
Now, the jury took this case very, very seriously. And the reason I say that is, and I don't know the exact amount, but I'm fairly certain that they sentenced her to 75 years on the financial crimes alone.
Yeah, so this was a lot really fast, and it's multiple episodes, but there's a guy, if you go to Advanced News Journal, there's a guy named Greg Windorf. He has a podcast that covers this that you can find. He also has a book that covers this case. Murder for the Love of Money is the name of the book. But one of his articles was very interesting to me. I read this while we were doing our Christmas, our 12 Days of Christmas thing. This is from the Advanced News Journal, which is just anjournal.com. From Wednesday, December 29th. And Greg Windorf wrote this. It's Wendorf. He wrote Patterson innocent of murder for the byline. The 54-year-old daughter of a prominent local political family, Monica Melissa Patterson, signed a petition December 21st at the Central Texas area women's prison, where she's currently housed for life with no chance of parole after she was convicted of capital murder in November 2017. The petition asked the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals to once again consider her felony conviction because she is innocent, according to her new attorney. And this is Windorf's words that I'm using here. He says, "Say what? Didn't the lower trial court already deny her motion for a new trial? Yes. Didn't the 13th Court of Appeals already deny her appeal? Yes. Didn't the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals even refuse to look at her appeal? Yes. So what's the point of her new appeal? Well, basically, her attorneys didn't do their job during the trial, according to this new motion by Monica Patterson. For example, there were times when they should have called their own expert witnesses, but did not. That's because there were none around who could refute the testimony and evidence coming from the prosecution. Plus, says her new attorney, Cynthia Orr, Patterson's murder victim, 96-year-old McAllen resident and World War II veteran Martin Nell, died of natural causes, meaning the plastic bag pulled down over his head while he was being forcibly held in his chair had nothing whatsoever to do with his demise 7 years ago. The broken ribs that showed up during the autopsy, the bruises on his chest and back where it was pressed into the chair while he was being murdered, completely natural. If Patterson's murder accomplice, Angel Mario Garza, has recanted the voluntary confession that he gave the night of his arrest in August 2015, which is pointed out in her new appeal motion, Patterson's innocence sure has more mountains to climb. Even then, Mario Garza, he pled guilty as part of a plea deal, and part of that deal includes his waiving the right to an appeal, so who cares if he recanted this confession? Plus, what murderer wouldn't recant a murder confession if he or she thought it might buy them some time out of prison? Garza was sentenced to 45 years and must serve half of the sentence before becoming eligible for parole, so no doubt he's looking for some mojo. First, he helped Patterson murder Nell for a promise of money, but now he says he was just making the whole thing up, which of course any of us would do when accused of a murder accusation. Did you kill the victim? Yes, why not? Got nothing better to do. Then you lay out a timeline and facts supported by science, such as cell phone pings off of towers that are date and time stamped, tied to individual phones belonging to Patterson and Garza. Pure coincidence. Garza just made up the details in his confession in line with the testimony coming from Nell's caretaker, and it all just fell into place. Monica Melissa Patterson is innocent. We have to keep that in mind. She was set up. She was framed. But God, this woman doesn't belong in prison. No, that's exactly where she belongs, with no chance of parole. According to Garza's confession, he held the old man in his kitchen chair while Patterson smothered him to death with a plastic trash bag, taken from the Comfort House, no less. Patterson also got prison time for stealing the nonprofit Blind when she worked as their administrator. She got 75 years in prison. Plus, she's got prison time for stealing from the Nell estate. Plus, she got prison time for failing her duties as a nonprofit fiduciary. She stripped its investment account clean, opened a secret bank account about which her board knew nothing, forged board minutes to open it, spent nonprofit money like it was going out of style to the point Comfort House was insolvent at the time of Patterson's arrest. But she says she's an innocent pawn in all of this and deserving of her freedom. For all these crimes, of course, according to the new motion on file at the Hidalgo County District Clerk's Office, Monica Melissa Patterson was a victim of poor legal representation, a dysfunctional jury, testimony from the medical examiner run amok. In other words, she thinks she should be freed or at least be the beneficiary of a new trial. Cynthia Orr is either being paid for her work by Patterson or the Innocence Project of Texas, with which Orr is associated, and which tries to get justice for people wrongly sentenced. If Patterson is paying for the legal representation, there are still hundreds of thousands of dollars missing from the accounts of her victims at the Nell Estate and Comfort House. So there's money to be had. In fact, the Do Good Texas Innocence Project isn't funding the cost of this new attempt to gain freedom. What's odd is, I'm sure there are plenty of innocent people incarcerated. How many? Who knows? I know one thing. After sitting through this murder trial and sentencing, which lasted approximately 6 weeks, there are innocent people locked up, but Monica Melissa Patterson isn't one of them. She was rightly convicted, and the evidence against her is overwhelming. It's laid out in 2 cable shows on Discover ID's Diabolical and on Oxygen Snapped. The case is also covered in the true crime book that the author wrote, which is Murder for the Love of Money. Reading that book, watching those cable shows, which you can find online, considering all the evidence presented at trial, reading about the way Patterson went about manipulating people, including the nonprofit board, which was charged with overseeing her work at the Comfort House, there is no reasonable doubt to be found, none whatsoever. She killed Nell to steal his $1 million estate. Case closed. That's why her all-star defense team, comprised of Rick Salinas, Renee Flores, Calixto Villarreal, and Fernando Mencias, couldn't call any defense witness to the stand to help establish reasonable doubt in the mind of the jurors. There was none to be had. And that's why Patterson's sole defense was spending as much time as possible discrediting witnesses called by the prosecution. That nonprofit board, by the way, included Dory Contreras, who is now the Chief Justice of the 13th Court of Appeals, although she didn't rule on the Patterson appeal. There were a lot of people on that board who let her get away with murder by not demanding to see the nonprofit's finances for more than a year, as Patterson went about stealing the place blind and was also stealing from a murder victim.
That's actually true, because they could have stopped her.
Except for a handful of board members, the entire Comfort House board of directors was lax in its oversight. The fact that the board included an appellate court chief justice is even harder to comprehend. Not only that, but when a small handful of people on the board settled with Patterson for approximately $70,000 at the office of a local attorney, they didn't let the entire board in on the settlement. They didn't let the entire board know that they were letting an in-house thief go free, agreeing to not call the cops. They're agreeing to keep that matter confidential. How does that work?
Somebody called them anyway, though.
Yeah, one of them did have one of them did quietly call the cops after it happened and gave them the evidence. That this is his words that I'm using here. He says, "You stole from this not-profit, but we're not going to let you walk away just the same." The real tragedy here, and this is what I wanted to bring up, besides the victim, is that Marty Nell's estate, which still sits in probate limbo. There's a hearing scheduled for January 11th, 2022 in the county's probate court, but this will undoubtedly be postponed now that a new criminal appeal has been filed. That's why more than 4 years after the Patterson trial ended in November 2017, Nell's son Mark still has no access to anything left in his dad's estate. Patterson took a lot of Nell's money, but there's still some in escrow. It's just that no one can get at it. Before the civil process could be played out, or so the argument went, the criminal case must be closed. After 3 years, her appeal moving through 2 courts, her appeal for a new trial seemed final and denied. Now, this new legal trick is to file a new appeal claiming new evidence, new witnesses, and fault the legal performance of Patterson's former 4 all-star attorneys. By the way, whoever is paying the attorney, or is also paying San Antonio-based private eyes to scour the RGV, which is the valley there, for the prosecution's lead witness, Nell's caretaker, who was at the scene when the murder went down, and who later reported the homicide to the Texas Rangers. There's also reportedly reaching out to jurors, trying to have a one-on-one discussion with them, looking for juror wrongdoing during the trial. Who's to say that this thing can't go on forever? It's like the song that never ends. It just goes on and on, my friends. If the Texas Court of Appeals again refuses to look at Patterson's case, what's to say that Patterson's new motion can't be then filed with the 13th Circuit, or even the trial court where it can collect dust? In Patterson's new motion, new witnesses are mentioned as having relevant information about Nell's natural death. Where were they back in 2016 and 2017 when the case was getting ready to go to trial? Where were they during the trial? This case shows how broken our justice system really is. If a convicted woman with a compliant attorney or two can continue manipulating the system with a new appeal every few years, it could go on forever. The facts are the Texas Rangers have the record of Patterson's cell phone calls, placing her at the scene of the crime when Nell was smothered to death. They have her accomplice's confession, even if he now wants to retract it. They have a paper trail of how Patterson stole Comfort House money, stole from her victim, and got him to turn over his entire estate to her within a span of only several months by convincing him that she was his protector and his son, Mark Nell, was really the villain. The prosecution has a direct paper trail of her funneling his money into her account the day of his murder and the day after. The old man is gone. Let's go spin city. So the murder victim in this case, already suffering from mild dementia, laid down with a viper and got bitten in the process. Now, there are people who want her released. If there is justice out there in the world, the Nell family sure isn't seeing any. So there's a note from the editor here, or it says Jan's note. This is the very definition of insanity. Do the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. What a fluster cluck.
Right.
Fluster cluck.
And this is a good example of, so she's got an attorney. That attorney's being paid. There's no question. More than likely with Martin's cash would be my guess. So he's actually paying for her appeal after her conviction. And that's just my guess because, there's all that cash they couldn't find. Professionally, I understand where defense attorneys, a lot of times they have to do crazy things like to do their job, right?
Yeah.
Because when you've got a defendant who just will not plead guilty, but really that's the only option you have because the evidence to refute the state's case just doesn't exist, which would be like this case, right?
Yeah.
I feel like money should not be the driving force when you get to this point in a case. And I think the fact that that an attorney is doing this for money, it reflects that not enough discretion is being used. Because the only reason, this is laboring on is because somebody is being paid. The private eye is going to talk to jurors. I mean, they're looking for Celestina. I hope they never find her, by the way. All that stuff. These are just people getting paid to do a job. And I don't feel like it's above board. It's not a great idea. This woman is not innocent. And that's the claim, right? Actual innocence. That's what they're claiming. And so it's really kind of scary to me that I understand the professional line where everybody deserves a defense, right? Okay, they deserve the best defense allowed under the law. However, this woman has had her defense and she was found guilty.
Yeah.
And I wish people would recognize the situation for what it was and not do the job just to be paid. I can't believe that anybody can find even a scintilla of information that she might be innocent based on all the evidence that they have indicating she's guilty.
Yeah, there's no way. I didn't find anything in here. So where we get here is we came over here from DL and Bella. Now, DL and Bella, I don't have any doubt about her involvement in the cases that we were covering. I do walk away from that with doubts as to whether or not Don Dial as a police officer would have done what is alleged for him to have done. And I assume the courts maybe have more information that I'm not seeing, and that's how they get there. But I can find a way for him not to have been involved if DL and Bella is completely responsible. This case is different. This case, I can't find any way for anyone else to be involved. And Celestina just seals the deal for me.
And, initially she was, so when she went to the Texas Rangers, they didn't just readily accept her side of things, right?
No, Calloway dug deep into this. He just gets on the case because she brings it up.
Well, and part of it, and so what I was saying a little bit earlier about the negative space again, where they were actually using contradictions, when she would lie or say untruths, a lot of times that's just circumstantial. That doesn't prove anything, right?
Right.
But in this particular case, when Celestina went a month later and presented or talked with the Rangers for 10 hours and gave the information that she had, initially, I mean, she could be, she's implicating herself, really, except she didn't really do anything. And what really turned the case, which I believe the article mentioned it, I'm sure we've mentioned it several times, but what really turned the case was that Monica insisted to the point of having one of her administrative workers lie that she had come into the office at 8:00 that morning.
Yeah.
And when they pinged the cell data and they got the records, it was very clear that her cell phone was at Martin's house, right?
Yes.
And that's one of the pivotal moments where they said, oh, well, Celestina is telling the truth. And because Monica lied, we're not giving her the benefit of the doubt any longer. And so that was really interesting to me because they took sort of they put more weight, which they're allowed to do. I mean, they put more weight on the fact that she lied about that really important detail that she wasn't at the house when she was.
Yeah.
And to me, it's really good that they did that, but it really shows sort of how touch and go this was. Now, in the article that you read, now that article obviously has a sarcastic tone to it, right?
That's why I kept saying it was his words. But I just felt, but there's still something about that sarcastic tone that conveys what I was thinking.
This case isn't showing how the justice system is broken. This case is actually really illustrating very well how the justice system works. What is happening is this is showing like how bad attorneys and private detectives need work.
I think he was just getting some frustration out there. It's not that.
Oh, sure. But I'm just saying, like, because you hear people say all the time, the justice system is broken, right? And it is broken, but this isn't an example of that. The justice system is where the Texas Rangers actually listened to Celestina, made a case, and she got indicted and convicted. That's the justice system happening. Right. The justice system being broken is Harold Henry dying in his doorway from an overdose of Benadryl without any remnants of Benadryl in his apartment and no writing utensil to have written the note he supposedly left, and that case being closed as if he had died from an accidental cause. That's where it starts being broken, right? Somebody got away with murder there.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. We are sponsored by LabbratiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabbratiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
I'm holding out for a light, need to break up the dark. I'm waiting up for a sign, some neon in the rough, a savior in the twilight. Come get me from this endless midnight. Gets harder in the nighttime, unraveling from tainted paradise. It pulled me under, silver tongue telling me lies. Somebody's a lover, it was the thrill of my life. Feel playing high stakes, lay down your ace and your heart, leaving it to fate. And it's just where it starts. My desperado,